Now on Denver 7 News at 4, we'll introduce you to a Colorado company making it easy to help redesign your outdoor spaces.
It's not just apartment renters being hit with big price increases recently, what small businesses are feeling and the impact it's having. And churches are now using reparations to address past ties to slavery. Why they say it's about more than just financial compensation.
And millions of Americans are expected to watch the January 6th hearings tonight.
I've watched most of them.
We take a look at who is tuning in and who thinks
So much of it, I have to say, was fake news.
Thank you for joining us at 4. I'm Jessica Porter. We start today with a live look at the U.S. Capitol, where in just 2 hours, the 8th and potentially final public hearing into the January 6th insurrection will take place. So what are we expecting from the committee tonight? And more importantly, how many people outside of D.C. are actually paying attention? Our Joe St. George went to one of the most competitive House districts in the country for perspective.
New testimony and new evidence is expected in tonight's January 6th committee hearing. Of course, the big question for us reporters covering this thing is whether anyone outside of Washington is paying attention to this. To find out, we left the Beltway and headed to Smithfield, Virginia. We didn't just choose this place randomly. This is part of the 2nd Congressional District of Virginia, one of the most competitive House districts in the country. It's the district Representative Elaine Laurier is running for re-election in. She's a Democrat on the January 6th committee and will be leading the hearing tonight. She's running against Republican Jen Kagans. Off Main Street here, we found Democrats.
I did vote for Joe Biden.
Republicans.
I don't care for Biden.
People who are watching. Have you watched all of these hearings or most of these hearings?
I've watched most of them.
And people who are not.
So much of it, I have to say, was fake news.
What we found is pretty consistent with the latest polling from Quinnipiac University. Around 58% of the country are following the hearings closely or somewhat closely. 74% of Democrats are watching this. 51% of Republicans are too.
A lot's coming out that the general public did not know.
Barbara Bendel told me she will be tuning in. She's a former Donald Trump supporter, but she says these hearings left her disgusted.
I've been real disappointed because it shows how a power-hungry president can do so much damage.
Over at the next table,
things are not what they used to be.
Carol Goralczyk says it's the witnesses that have kept her watching. She was particularly struck by Cassidy Hutchinson, the young Trump aide who testified the former president knew the rioters were armed and that he encouraged them to go to the Capitol.
I just felt she was being totally honest. There's no way she could make all that up.
Tonight's hearing is expected to provide the most complete account of what former President Trump was doing in the White House while the rioters were breaching the Capitol.
He was a very outspoken man.
But that won't be enough to get Tim Hersom, who voted for Trump, to tune in. Although he does plan to read news reports after the hearing takes place. So far, though, he hasn't been convinced.
I wish someone could stand up for him, but I really don't know how much involvement he had.
And then there is Rebecca.
I don't know anything about him.
You haven't watched it all?
No. On purpose.
She told me she doesn't have time as a mom to devote hours to television, and while she hates to look at the images of January 6th, she says if Donald Trump runs for president again, she may vote for him.
If he's the lesser of two evils again, I'm going to vote for him again.
These answers are a reminder that in many parts of the country, January 6th isn't the top story. Ultimately, the Department of Justice will decide if anyone, including former President Trump, gets charged with a crime. In Smithfield, Virginia, I'm Joe St. George.
Joe, thank you. And you can watch tonight's hearings live starting at 6 right here on Denver 7.
President Biden's staff says he has very mild symptoms after he tested positive for COVID today. He's now taking Paxlovid, the antiviral drug designed to reduce the severity of COVID. In this letter from the president's doctor, he says since Biden is fully vaccinated and boosted twice, he anticipates he'll respond favorably to the treatment. Now, he is isolating at the White House. Now, his staff says that he will be participating in his planned meetings by phone and Zoom. He plans to keep working in isolation until he tests negative. Orders are expected to begin next week for the newest COVID vaccine. The CDC says the number of doses of Novavax will be limited to around 3 million. The focus is on getting the shot to people who have been hesitant about the mRNA shots that are currently available. Around 1 in 10 Americans haven't had at least one COVID shot yet, according to the CDC. 16% of people say in a CDC survey that they would probably or definitely get vaccinated if a protein-based vaccine like Novavax was available.
Even as Colorado law enforcement and lawmakers crack down on fentanyl dealers, there are still challenges in the courtroom when it comes to prosecuting such cases. Denver 7's Colette Bordelon joining us now with two defendants who were sentenced today, both for fentanyl-related crimes.
Yes, two very different cases. So in the first one I want to talk about, prosecutors were actually able to bring first-degree murder charges against an alleged dealer related to the death of a minor. But after a 6-day trial, the jury returned a guilty verdict on manslaughter charges. That defendant being sentenced right now as we speak. We do have a reporter in the courtroom and we'll be following that closely. But then at another sentencing this morning in Adams County, that defendant got 3 years of probation for fentanyl possession. And prosecutors say they just couldn't put charges of manslaughter or distribution onto that case. Still, though, outside of the courtroom this morning, a protest took place ahead of Sergio Guerra-Carrillo's sentencing, where he pleaded guilty to having 4 grams of fentanyl at the beginning of this year. And in the courtroom today, the mom of 18-year-old Max Osterman wanted to talk to the judge. Her son, in February of last year, died after taking fentanyl in some form. Detectives from Broomfield have evidence that Guerra-Carrillo is the one who sold the fentanyl to Osterman.
Sold a deadly drug and took a life. He needs to be put away for murder, for homicide, drug-induced homicide. He took my son's life.
The judge couldn't take her testimony into consideration since the two are separate cases. However, Osterman's mom still does not feel that probation punishment even fits the possession crime. She also doesn't think this is where it stops. She wants to see the DA review her son's case and file charges related to his death. Live in Denver, Colette Bordelon, Denver 7.
Colette, thank you. And adding some context and depth here, overdose rates have soared during the COVID-19 pandemic, and a new CDC study indicates deadly overdoses are hitting some communities harder than others. Researchers found overall drug overdose death rates increased 30% between 2019 and 2020. However, they jumped 44% among Black people and 39% among American Indian and Alaskan Native people. The CDC also found significant disparities by age group and gender. Young Black people ages 15 to 24 had a larger increase in overdose deaths than any other group. And overdose deaths among senior Black men was nearly 7 times higher than that of senior white men. The current rates are on top of existing disparities, which researchers say might come from unequal access to treatment, socioeconomic inequities, and other social factors.
The unemployment rate is going up. The number of Americans applying for benefits reached the highest level in 8 months last week. That is according to numbers out today from the Labor Department. Some job analysts had expected the number of claims to drop. Now, there aren't a lot of part-time jobs available right now. More employers are seeing the value of a full-time staff and offering fewer part-time positions. More job seekers are looking for that full-time work. The Labor Department says that's created a 20-year low of part-time workers. They now make up just 2% of the workforce. Working from home at some jobs is going from essential to perhaps a replacement for a raise or bonus. That is according to a new study from the National Bureau of Economic Research. Out of 500 companies, 38% reported doing this in the last year to keep wage growth pressures at bay. 41% plan to do it in the next year. Finance, insurance, and real estate firms were the most likely.
This is not new. There were studies 20 years ago that said that people would give up 10 to 20% of their income in order to have more flexibility. And so the workers have been, screaming into the night for years for more ways to manage their lives.
But she says companies do need to better keep track of who is taking the remote option. If it's all working moms, foregoing a raise or bonus could have negative impacts on the gender pay gap. A survey last year from a working moms group found 79% would prefer to work from home.
Over the long haul, women live longer and they are generally less well-resourced as they get older. And so we're going to create another problem if we don't keep an eye on all of that and find ways to creatively address it.
Overall, she says if you are a high performer at work and have the numbers to back it up, you may be in a position to negotiate both remote work and a raise. Access to childcare is a challenge right now, with care facilities still short-staffed.
The system was broken before the pandemic. What the pandemic did was make it obvious to everyone else.
The new ways employers are stepping up to try to help families.
And volunteers in Colorado lending a hand to someone in need. Up next on Denver 7 News at 4, we'll show you how easy it is to help change someone's life.